All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive. Whenever tariffs are in the news and we're all talking about trade wars and all that, there's this question that just keeps popping up. Why do prices here at home, for things made here in the good old USA, often seem to jump up when those import taxes get slapped on? It almost feels too obvious, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a really common observation. And the immediate thought that a lot of folks have is that domestic companies are just like, oh, sweet, less competition from overseas. Let's crank up those prices. Time to rake in some extra profits. Almost seems like they're just taking advantage, right?
Exactly. It's that kind of cynical view, like, oh, here we go again, the big corporations squeezing us consumers.
Yeah.
But while there might be those isolated instances where that kind of opportunistic behavior plays a small role, the real story, the one we're going to really try to untangle today, goes much deeper. It hinges on some pretty fundamental economic principles. What we're going to do today is break down why these price increases happen, even when there's actually plenty of competition among domestic producers themselves.
And getting a handle on those deeper reasons is really important because we just jumped to the conclusion that it's all about domestic companies price gouging, trying to squeeze every last penny out of us. Well, the knee-jerk reaction might be to call for price controls. But the article you're looking at today actually suggests that those kinds of interventions could completely backfire and make things even worse for everyone.
Interesting. So for this deep dive, we're turning to an article from Marginal Revolution. It came out April 6th, 2025, and it's titled, Why Do Domestic Prices Rise with Tariffs? Let's start with that initial gut reaction we were talking about, the idea that domestic producers just jack up prices when they see foreign competition taking a hit. It makes sense on the surface. But like you said, it doesn't explain why prices often go up, even when there's still plenty of competition happening between businesses right here at home.
Absolutely. A drop in competition from imports, it can definitely create some space for some price adjustments. Maybe some companies might nudge their prices up a little bit, but it doesn't really fully explain those widespread price increases we often see across the board in domestic markets once those tariffs kick in. There's a more fundamental mechanism at play.
So what is that core economic explanation then? The article really digs into the whole concept of opportunity costs and how resources get shuffled around within an economy. Let's imagine a scenario to really illustrate this. Let's say, hypothetically, some tariffs are slapped on those lovely French and Italian wines that, many of us enjoy.
Yeah, good example. So suddenly, those imported bottles of vino, they get a bit pricier for us consumers here in the States. And what happens then? People start looking for alternatives, right? Naturally. And a primary alternative in this case would be wine produced domestically. Those California wines, for example.
Right, so demand for California wine goes up. And this is where it gets really fascinating. The article points out that significantly boosting production, especially in a short amount of time, is rarely a simple or, and this is key, cost-free endeavor, even under normal circumstances.
Totally. Think about what it actually takes to make more wine. Those producers in Napa and Sonoma, they need more of practically everything. More grapes, which might mean they need more land for vineyards, more oak barrels for aging, more workers out in the vineyards and in the wineries themselves, and maybe most crucially, more land. But here's the thing, the most fertile land, the land that's in the ideal location for growing grapes and is therefore the most cost-effective, that land is probably already being used for vineyards.
So to really increase their output to meet that new demand, they'd have to start using land that's maybe not so great for growing grapes. Or even more significantly, they might need to buy up land that's currently being used for something completely different. And this is where that concept of opportunity cost comes into the picture, right?
Exactly. And the article gives some great real-world examples of this. Those wine-producing regions, they're not just potential vineyard spots. That same land could be used for growing olives for olive oil, raising dairy cows to make cheese, growing all sorts of amazing artisanal vegetables, having livestock grazing, you name it. You could even use that land for housing developments, especially those catering to tourists who want to visit the wine country. And get this, even for geothermal energy projects in places like Sonoma County.
Geothermal energy, wow. That really gets you thinking about all the different ways that same piece of land could be used. So as domestic wine production tries to ramp up to meet that higher demand, it starts pulling resources away from all these other valuable activities. Land, labor, even investment money gets redirected.
Precisely. And that right there is the core reason why the price of wine produced domestically tends to rise. It's not simply a matter of wineries thinking, oh, we can charge more now, let's do it. It's because boosting wine production takes resources away from those other valuable things we were just talking about. That higher price you see on that bottle of California wine, That's reflecting the opportunity cost. It's the value of the olive oil, the cheese, those vegetables, and everything else that society is giving up or making less of in order to have more wine made here at home.
Okay, so the price hike isn't just some arbitrary thing. It's actually a signal, a sign that resources are being moved around within the economy. And those other potential uses for those resources, they have a real value that we're now missing out on. This really naturally brings us to the whole idea of international trade and how tariffs can mess with that whole system that's supposed to be mutually beneficial.
Absolutely. At its heart, international trade is beneficial because producers in different countries, they have different strengths, different efficiencies, different costs for doing business. Foreign producers, they might be able to give us certain goods, like those French and Italian wines, for fewer of our own resources than it would take us to produce them ourselves here.
So it's like we've got two paths we can choose from, right? We can try to do everything ourselves, become more self-sufficient, produce more of something we want, even if we're not the best at it. But as we've just seen, that usually means pulling resources away from other things and driving up prices. Or the other option, we can focus on producing the stuff we're really good at, where we have a natural advantage, where we're more efficient, and then trade some of that for the things we want from other countries.
Exactly. And when foreign producers can make certain goods more cheaply than we can, that second option, the specializing and trading route, usually means more wealth overall for everyone involved in the trade. We get more variety, we get access to goods at a lower cost in terms of our own resources. Everybody wins.
But tariffs, they kind of throw a wrench in the gears of that whole efficient system. By making those imported goods pricier, they basically push us to buy more of the domestic stuff, even if making those same goods here at home uses up more resources and costs more overall. It's like we're taking a step backward.
Yeah, it's like we're taking a detour. And as the article points out, we end up sacrificing more of those other valuable goods and services, maybe more of that olive oil and cheese in our example, than we would have if we just kept buying the wine from overseas. It's a trade-off, but maybe not the best one.
So the end result is we actually have less overall wealth in the country that puts up those tariff walls. We're using more of our resources to get the same amount of a product than we would have needed if we'd just gone the international trade route. It's counterintuitive, but that's economics for you sometimes.
Absolutely. And the article brings up another really important point that flips that whole greedy producer narrative on its head. It says that tariffs don't actually increase total domestic production within a country. Instead, they mainly just shift resources and production from one domestic industry to another. It's like shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic.
That's a really key distinction. It's not about creating more stuff overall. It's about rearranging what we're already doing, and often in a way that's not the most efficient use of our resources. This leads us to that concept of wasted resources that the article digs into, using the example of a sugar tariff from the economics textbook Modern Principles.
Yeah, a classic example. This example really shines a light on the real cost of a tariff. Imagine sugar is selling globally for 9 cents a pound. Without a tariff, people here could buy sugar at that price, no problem. But if a tariff comes into play, it pushes up the price of imported sugar, which makes domestic sugar production suddenly look a lot more appealing financially. Let's say this tariff leads to domestic sugar production jumping up to 20 billion pounds, like in the textbook example.
So domestic sugar producers are happy. They're making more sugar. But just like with our wine scenario, to hit that higher production level, they need more of everything. More land for growing sugarcane, more workers for harvesting and processing, more investment in equipment. These resources, they have to come from somewhere else in the domestic economy, which means they're being taken away from other potential uses.
Here's the kicker. The economic value of those resources that get pulled into the sugar industry, it actually ends up being more than what people would have paid for that same amount of sugar from foreign producers at the lower world price. It's like we're paying a premium to make it ourselves. This difference, this extra cost we pay because we shifted resources to domestic sugar production thanks to the tariff, that's what economists call wasted resources.
So these aren't resources that were just sitting idle. They were being used to produce other things that people wanted and valued. And because of the tariff, they're now being used in a way that's less efficient overall to make sugar. That yellow area you often see on those economics graphs that explain tariffs, the one that represents wasted resources, that's the value of all those other goods and services that aren't being produced anymore because of this resource shuffle.
Exactly. It's the value of what we as a country have given up, by shifting resources to make sugar at home instead of using those resources to make things where we have a comparative advantage,
Yeah.
where we can produce stuff at a lower opportunity cost.
Ah, comparative advantage, the classic econ concept. Let's loop back to that and connect it to everything we've been talking about.
So comparative advantage basically means a country can produce a particular good or service at a lower opportunity cost compared to another country. It's like being really good at something while other countries struggle with it. International trade lets countries focus on making what they're best at, leading to greater efficiency globally and more wealth for everyone involved. Tariffs, though, they kind of work against this whole principle by artificially encouraging domestic production in areas where a country might not be so efficient. It's like forcing a square peg into a round hole.
Someone in the comments section of the article made a brilliant analogy about this. They said that giving up our comparative advantage to try and produce everything ourselves is like benching your star player in a game to give everyone equal playing time. It might seem fair in theory, but your team's performance is going to tank.
It's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
You're basically sacrificing overall economic productivity and efficiency for the sake of artificially boosting one particular domestic sector, even if it doesn't make much economic sense from the standpoint of the whole economy.
So, to sum it all up, domestic prices go up when tariffs are imposed. And it's not mainly because domestic producers are being greedy and exploiting the situation, although that might happen sometimes on a small scale. The main driver is that we need to pull resources away from other valuable uses within the economy in order to increase domestic production enough to meet the demand when imports are restricted. This reshuffling of resources leads to higher opportunity costs, and those costs ultimately get passed on to us in the form of higher prices for domestic goods.
Exactly. And while it might seem at first glance like those price increases are just a transfer of wealth from consumers to domestic producers in the protected industry, the reality is a lot more nuanced. There's a wider cost to society as a whole. We end up producing and consuming less of other goods and services that could have been made more efficiently if we'd used those resources differently.
This brings us to a final thought-provoking question for you, our listeners. We've been talking about these wasted resources, mostly in terms of economics, the loss of other goods and services. But is the cost of making things domestically under tariffs always a pure economic waste? Are there maybe other things to consider, like national security concerns, or the desire to build up industries that are seen as crucial for future growth, or even social implications that might play into this whole calculation, even if they don't fit neatly into a short-term economic model? It's something to ponder that goes beyond the immediate price tag we see on a product.
Definitely a lot to think about. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We hope this exploration into the economic reasons behind why domestic prices often rise when tariffs are imposed has given you a new and maybe even surprising perspective on this complex issue.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and keep these economic ideas in mind the next time you hear people talking about tariffs and trade policies. There's often a lot more going on under the surface than just those price changes we see in the headlines. Food for thought.